Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, there's been a lot of discussion in the EU referendum campaign about money. How much do we pay to the EU and what do we get in return? One of the tangible benefits is the subsidies for farming. But the environmentalist and writer and reluctant EU Remainer George Monbiot argues that might not be the best use of the funds. Here he is with his soapbox.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. And on that farm he had some cows, E-I-E-I-O. With a moo-moo here, a moo-moo there, cattle everywhere.
Why is it that the biggest item in the EU's budget is scarcely mentioned in the referendum debate? I'm talking about farm subsidies, the 55 billion euros a year that the European Union doles out to landowners. The more land you own, the more money you receive. Some people are getting millions. It's daylight robbery. The rest of us are being taxed to subsidise the richest people in the land.
With a moo-moo here, a moo-moo there, cattle everywhere. And when those cows got out of line, hamburger medium rare.
Even worse, the subsidy rules insist that you must destroy trees and other wildlife if you want the money.
And on that farm he had some cows, E-I-E-I-O. With a moo-moo here, a moo-moo there, cattle everywhere.
There's no limit to the subsidies you can get for owning land. Some landowners use their social security to buy racehorses and private jets, while the benefits for people who need them to make ends meet, ordinary folk, those are capped.
Well, old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O.
At the very least, subsidies for landowners should be capped at the same level as benefits for everyone else. I think I'm going to vote to remain in the EU on the 23rd of June. But if we do stay, let's demand that it stops robbing the poor to give to the rich.
And George Monbiot joins us now. And we've also been joined by another George Eustice, the farming minister, who is campaigning to leave the EU. And I won't muddle them up, I promise. George Monbiot, can you get the reform you want while still being in the EU?
Well, that's a really good question. And I have to say on this issue, the EU has been unresponsive and unaccountable. It's really, really hard to get them to listen. It's not necessarily the European Commission at fault. There's been a deal, a rather dodgy deal, between France on the one hand and Britain and Germany on the other, where France says we want the biggest budget possible, and Britain in particular has been saying we want no cap on the individual contributions.
So why are you staying in? I mean, you've made a very strong case for leaving.
Because it's not just about agriculture. There's lots of other issues as well. Now, you know, but I think it's dishonest to say because I'm an in-campaigner or because I'm vaguely for remaining, I should pretend that everything about the EU is rosy and good.
Right. Is that the only reason you're leaving, then, to do with farming?
Well, I think we'd be better off taking back control across the piece. But the point I'd make on agriculture, I spent 2.5 years wrestling with the sort of regulations that George has talked about. And the trouble is you can't really get proper reform in the European Union. You've got 28 governments, all with different political persuasions, all with different agricultural sectors structured differently. The truth is that fundamentally, the idea of a pan-European legal system that tries to govern agriculture is just flawed. And that is why we need to get rid of that and go back to putting in place our own agricultural policy so that we can design something much more sensible, much more holistic. You know, the environment's incredibly complex, and that's why you need the flexibility to be able to do things differently.
Right, but what about the subsidies that farmers would lose?
Well, they wouldn't lose them. I've been very clear that we would still support farming at the same level, but we would spend money differently.
So you've been clear, but would you be able to guarantee that level of money?
Well, I can guarantee that if we stop sending £350 million a week to Brussels...
We've already had the discussion, of course. Let's talk about the net figures.
Well, the point is this. The point I'd make is this. You know, we would have more than enough money to fund an agricultural policy.
If the priority was towards farming and agriculture.
No, but and the environment as well, and the environment and animal welfare. There are other objectives.
Hang on a second, Douglas.
So we're spending over £3 billion a year in this country on farming, recycled through the EU and paid back to landowners. We call it to farming. It's actually just being paid for owning land. That's what you get the subsidy for, the primary subsidy. And to say, you know, we're facing a shortfall, an annual shortfall in the NHS of roughly 3 billion. We're going to give it to landowners instead of dealing with the shortfall in the NHS. No one's going to stand for that. The only reason why the subsidy system exists is that we can say, oh, that's all Brussels' business.
I don't agree with that, actually. We would be delivering environmental objectives. And the crucial thing is...
Which ones?
An agriculture policy delivers a number of things. First of all, it helps to safeguard our food security. And I'm in favour of looking at some of the insurance models they've got in Canada to help farmers mitigate risk so that they have the confidence to invest. But secondly, you could put in place a whole suite of different environmental schemes to have catchment-sensitive farming, to protect our watercourses, to promote habitats. We could do it far better than the clunky system that we've got now.
This is all the stuff you've been trying to scrap while you've been Agriculture Minister, and I've seen the
That's
speeches
not what I'm trying to scrap, I'm trying to reform.
Wait a minute, George. I've seen the speeches you've given where you've said, we're going to tear down the regulations, we're going to tear down the conditions that you have to meet as a farmer in order to get this money. And just as the ordinary recipients of benefits have had their conditions racked up until it's extremely difficult to survive on social security, under your watch, farmers have had their conditions reduced and reduced. So we're basically giving away the money for nothing. And even when farmers are stripping the soil off the land, are contributing to floods, are wiping out bees, wiping out songbirds, they are still getting their subsidies. So when you judge you on your record, we find a completely different picture to the one you're trying to paint.
The point that I've made is we need to have clarity about what's regulation and enforce that properly, not the kind of system we have now where there's an arbitrary system of rush justice through something called
But can you deny some of the claims made on your record, though?
Definitely, yes. I mean, we've put in place, we've got £3 billion over the next 5 years going into environmental stewardship. And I'm saying that we would retain that kind of Pillar 2 activity that promotes the development of habitats.
But what about the claims that farmers have contributed to flooding and they've done it because they felt they had to, or they didn't have the money or support to do anything else?
Well, they've done it because the design of the Common Agricultural Policy is so bonkers, frankly. And, you know, George himself will understand this. We have rules. I do oppose this. We have rules.
I've never heard you make a single public statement saying
all the time.
This is what's wrong with the current
all of the time what's wrong with the current system. For instance, we have too many. There are rules that say you can only have 100 trees per hectare in order to make it eligible. There are then rules that say what's the maximum width of the girth of a tree.
Yeah. All right, but let's talk about the subsidy issue, because if it's going to landowners, why should landowners continue to be subsidised by taxpayers here or, you know, anywhere in the EU if farmers aren't getting that money? Why do they deserve a leg up?
Well, because we'd be in future, if you change it the way I want
now.
to. Well, no, at the moment it's not right, because it is true that there are large landowners who, George says, are not often farming. Some of them receiving payments of over £500,000 a year, one or two actually receiving payments of over £1 million.
You guarantee they wouldn't get that anymore?
I'm guaranteeing we'll change the system so that you first of all help farmers manage risk through government-backed insurance schemes, and secondly so that you reward farmers for doing genuine work for the environment, not giving them a subsidy and then trying to retrospectively justify it through this cross-compliance.
Well, doesn't that sound like it would solve one of your complaints then, that actually wealthy landowners wouldn't be getting a subsidy to fly and land their helicopters?
Would you cap the level of subsidies that any one person could get at the same level that ordinary recipients of benefits are capped?
I wouldn't go for it that way, because if you've got somebody who's got several hundred acres and you know, some of the best work we do is the higher level stewardship work where we're actually really investing in habitats. That's really successful. But look, it's this, George. I would not just be giving, it wouldn't be a subsidy anymore. It would be a payment for ecosystem services, a payment for work to improve water quality, to promote habitats. Farming is unique in that it's intrinsically entwined with our natural landscape, our natural environment. That's why it's different. That is why you do need public support for those public goods, which actually you can't reward in the marketplace always.
And you do accept we need a farming industry or not?
We do, yes. And what George is suggesting would certainly be an improvement if we could trust him that that's what we're going to end up with. Well, but the trouble is that everything we've been hearing from him on environmental regulations is reduce, reduce, reduce. Let's slash them. Let's get these things out of the way. They're stifling enterprise. What was it? Soul-destroying, spirit-wrecking?
Spirit-crushing, and they are. I've spent 2.5 years dealing with this.
This is
well,
what
then why should we trust you then to actually put in place something that would protect the environment.
They're spirit crushing because they don't work. We are forced sometimes to spend
spirit crushing
tens.
Because they prevent the farmers who you seem to regard yourself as being solely in charge of helping. They prevent them from ripping up the hedgerows, from destroying.
They force us to do things the wrong way.
precious.
If we want a coherent environmental policy, we have to deliver it and take control.
George?
We can't just abdicate responsibility.
Those regulations are all we have to fall back on at the moment, and to prevent farmers.
Well, that's because we've
abdicated
abdicated responsibility. Take back control. We'll take back responsibility.
George and George, thank you very much. I'm sure you've got a great future together, the two of you, in some sort of double act.